We need to acknowledge that this is probably the most important vital sign for a woman's health. It tells me about your thyroid. It tells me about your digestion. It tells me about your nutrients or any deficiencies. It tells me about, I could go on and on and on.
Toxicity, everything.
Toxicity,
hydration.
right. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated, it's life protecting life.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And let's not forget that, I was just at a wedding this weekend. That's actually what brought us out here. And one of the, an older woman at the wedding came up and I was holding our baby girl who's 16 months. And she was like, "Oh, what a cute baby. Are you guys going to have more kids?" And I said, "Well, actually, my wife's pregnant." She said, "Oh, so she didn't use precautions."
Oh, jeez.
And I was like, "Well, really? I just left my stuff where it shouldn't have gone." If every man would just take responsibility for where they shoot their semen, we wouldn't really have to worry about all this other stuff that we're fighting for, like contraceptive rights and all this other stuff. It's like, guys, you have to stand up and realize just how important this thing that your partner is going through.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of financial and all this other stuff. That's all important. You are here to worship this woman who's about to bring your baby into the world. So man up, do the thing. And I don't even know what that entails. It means something different for everybody. But I think in the very, very least, just step back and appreciate how connected this is to the grand scheme of what it means to be human. This is the most human experience you and your partner are going to go through.
Mm-hmm. And it's also the most powerful religious experience. Real religion. It's the most powerful shamanic experience. It's a transcendent experience.
It is. Transformation of spirit. That's right.
It takes you into true adulthood. And if you're not ready for it, then the loser is the child. Mm-hmm. Because the child can't really interface and become an adult with parents that have not become adults themselves. And that is one of the largest problems we have in the world right now, is we have lost our structure of mythology that guides us through birth, childhood, early adulthood, elderly, and death. So now we have, there's 32,000 branches of Christianity. Some say 33,000. We have there's so much confusion about what the truth is and about how do you go through the life process. We have not got a cultural myth anymore. We've really got, our cultural myth is consumerism. If you're not happy, buy something. If you're sick, get a drug. It's all about buying
exploitation. Right.
And so it's a very dangerous time we're in, and we'll, obviously we know there's some other elements that we can talk about in a little bit, but I want to also talk briefly about what fathers need to be prepared for when a woman gets pregnant and has a baby, because they go through a lot of changes. And even with my knowledge of that, Angie went through a lot of changes, and I had to kind of find a way to understand her. For one, women are much more sensitive if a man has any inkling toward another woman, because she's got this child she's got to care for the rest of its life. So if a man's not devoted to her fully, it can leave her very insecure.
Yeah. Right.
And also because they have so little sleep. Research, I did a university course on the science of sleep and the current research on sleep probably 5 years ago. But they said something in the course that was pretty interesting. They actually have monitored the brains of women and found that by the first year, the actual size of a woman's brain shrinks by 1 centimeter in diameter.
Due to sleep.
So her whole brain shrinks 1 centimeter due to sleep deprivation. Wow. And it talked about how, things like getting cut, industrial accidents, car accidents, a lot of problems emerge in that first year because a woman's barely hanging on.
Right.
And
It's a
so
huge stress on your life. It
there's
really
a
is.
lot of emotions and a lot of, like, because I've worked long shifts in various environments, like I said, fishing, military, I know how you can just get to the point where you don't have any emotional buffer. You're just like, feed me right now or I'm going to shoot you. Get out of my way, I'm tired. But we don't get trained as men what to expect
Yeah.
and what a woman goes through. So if you don't understand these things, you can think that your partner is just being downright nasty or rude. But when you really start realizing how depleted they are and how exhausted and how in need of support they are, I think if men knew that, they would understand. I've had several cases of young men consulting with me because they're like 1 year in and they're experiencing all this stuff. And they say to me, I can't handle it. I don't know who this woman is anymore. She drives me crazy. She's nasty. I don't want to be around her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, guess what? That's what it means to be an adult.
Right.
That's
Welcome to adulthood.
That's your responsibility.
Yeah.
Just because she's not the hot little chickie that bowed and got down on her knees and gave you blowjobs when you wanted to anymore doesn't mean she's not your partner. And that's, kids, your responsibility.
Yeah. Right.
So we've got a whole sea of young men that, because they don't know the power of their own dick, want to drop the seed, have the fun, but then get the hell out of the kitchen when it gets hot in the kitchen. And I think that if men in general, but young men in particular, realized the responsibility that goes with having a penis and the power behind it. I mean, if you look at my poster right there, that's the history of all world religions. First, we worshiped trees. And you see, the second one is the symbol of the lingam and the yoni, right? And then the third was the snake. So the first thing we thought was God was trees because it seemed that life was sustained by trees. They were shelter, they were food. There was enough of an indication that without trees we couldn't exist. And so, the story of us coming out of the trees into the savannah in the African story. But then you have the sex organs because they realized that whenever those two got together, life happened. So they thought that the sex organs were God. And that is the beginning. That goes all the way back to 10,000 years ago.
Sure.
And ultimately, you see it goes from the trees to the sex organs to the serpent to fire to the sun. So that's the foundation of all world religions. Trees, sex organs, serpent energy, fire, and the sun.
I think that
is the basis of
having been a young man myself, I do think we lack modeling. We lack modeling for what that role really is to be a man. Mm-hmm. It's not just fatherhood. Fatherhood's like a part of being a man, but you don't have to be a father to become a man necessarily. I think it certainly it's a preparatory, it's an initiation. Certainly it was for me. And what I found was I didn't have a lot of people even to turn to.
No, there isn't.
Who wanted to admit, like, this was really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people are willing to say that was really hard, or I'm afraid, or I'm happy, or I'm sad? As a man, nobody really rewards you for doing that. And in medical training, especially, it's a total dehumanization process. So that's why I think so many doctors seem so calloused. They tell you when you're going to poop, pee, have sex, have fun, laugh, cry, when you're going to be able to go out for a drink, when you're going to be stuck here in a call room. And even I had my an attending, one of my supervising docs in residency, said, your wife needs to know that she comes second now. And that was 4 months in. So you can tell how it probably went from there, So for us to then actually, to actually acknowledge this power and to reclaim that power, I mean, that's been my work since the birth of this little baby. And I told you a little bit about that story. I took a little medicinal journey and went very, very deep. Because I struggled with connecting to this baby. This baby needs me to just hold space for her. And I had a hard time when she was screaming at me and I didn't have the answer. So it's like, just give it to mom. She probably just wants some breastfeeding or whatever. And she didn't need anything. She just needed you to hold space for how hard it is for this little kiddo to come into the world. But nobody teaches you that. No. You have to have the self-awareness to realize, like, this is your job right here. Just hold that space. Don't worry about what's on Instagram. Don't worry about missing your TV show. Don't worry about when you're going to be able to go out with your buddies for a drink. That'll come if that's what you do. Right now, be with your daughter and
That's
let her
great.
scream, and let her know that you are there with your hands. And you didn't just bring her in, you were here for her. There's a healing property to that. I mean, that is the initiation. That's how I became a man. And through that journey, actually, I told you about, there was a visualization of me going down a corridor with all of this writing on the walls, like stuff that I could make out, but it's almost like the Akashic records. Somebody actually mentioned that to me. And I ended at the end of the hallway, and there was nothing. It was absolute. It wasn't black. It was just it was the void, you know. And I opened my eyes at that point and saw our bassinet in the bedroom, and I just broke down into tears and sobbed for hours. There was something deeply. There was a piece of me that I knew I had to give to this person, and I had to give to this person, my wife, who had just passed through that portal that we talk about. And by being there in that moment in this journey, it came to me that it's like you are nothing if you can't just become a part, if you can't unify with these people and allow yourself to change. And that was my own portal walking through there. But I mean, that's tough work. You know, a lot of people they numb it. They numb it with alcohol. They numb it with other drugs. And
that's what a rite of passage is. You're describing the passage.
It literally was the rite of passage.
Wow.
Yeah.
So for a woman, it's the birth canal. That's the rite of passage. Women don't have to go through initiation ceremonies. They have them in native cultures, but they're things like when a woman first starts to menstruate, in some cultures, they say, now you have to learn what it means to be a goddess, because the woman is the one that gathers the food and prepares the food. Her orientation to life is that of bringing nourishment and to support life. So one of the tribal cultures I studied, what they do is they take the young girl and they put her in a tent by herself for a week. And her only function is to sit in this tent, which symbolizes the womb, and contemplate becoming the goddess.
Wow. And
so occasionally her mother and father can come talk to her and, explore what's coming through her mind. But they isolate her for a week to just contemplate what it means now to be the goddess. And that's part of their initiation process. For some, it's birth itself. The first initiation is menstruation. The second one is the birthing process. But with men, they have to create a birthing of adulthood, an initiation process. And a lot of people don't know it, but do you know how the sweat lodge got created?
I don't know how it was created, no.
The sweat lodge was created by Native American women because they found that men did not have enough empathy for what they were going through while they were carrying babies and giving birth.
Oh, wow.
So Native elder women actually designed the sweat lodge, and the original sweat lodges are little like wigwams shaped like a womb.
Wow.
And they built the fire in the center of it, and they put the men in, and they said, now you're going to sit here, we're going to close the door, and we're going to make it so damn hot you're about to die, and you're going to stay here till we tell you you can leave. And so the sweat lodge was to initiate men into the experience of being pregnant. And I've done 2 sweat lodges properly run in a little tiny tent, homemade, exactly based on the Native American system, by a Steiner teacher. And let me fucking tell you, that was very freaking intense, pal. It was like
Sounds hot.
It was so hot I was on the edge of going unconscious.
And you're no stranger to discomfort.
No, I was like, and what was really hard for me is there was like 3 women in this circle. The tent will only hold 12, so they pack it full. It's like you're in a sardine can. Literally, like the fire is 3 or 4 inches from you, and your back's against the wall of the tent. And he brings that water in there and pours the water, and they've got these hot rocks that have been heating up in the fire all day long. These things are glowing hot. So they have a pit of rocks inside, and they have a fire outside. The fire's got piles of rocks.
Wow. Oof.
So after each round, and you're singing sacred songs and doing prayers, and the first round you think, oh, this is cool. This is like having a sauna. But boy, by the time that ended that second round, I'll tell you what, I had to turn around backwards So my ass was facing the fire and put my face down on the ground, and I was trying to draw air in from
Through the
right through the
sand.
soil
Oh.
because I was starting to go into heat exhaustion and going unconscious. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can make that. And I thought, God, if I try to be a superhero, and what my point was is the women didn't even seem like it was phasing them. They're like looking at me, and they could see that I was in trouble, and so were several of the other guys, and they kind of had that little look of, you're not so tough now, are you, Mr. Muscles? And I'm like, shit. So I got out at the second round. I had to get out and cool down and drink water and
replenish.
Because I was afraid I was going to be a medical emergency in there.
Yeah.
But the second time, I said, okay. So I was careful. I didn't have a lot of food in me. I kept the meat to a bare minimum. I hydrated for a couple of days, and I took two of my buddies that were in training as CHEK practitioners, and they were badass weightlifter types. And they said, "Oh, we heard you're doing a sweat lodge. We want to go do a sweat lodge because we really heard it's tough, and we want to see if we can make it." I said, "I'll be willing to bet you." I said, "If you make it through that thing, I bet you $50, the two of you. I'll give you each $50 if you can make it through." And they were like, "Oh, we can do it." I'm like, okay. They got out. Same as me. They made it to the end of the second round, and they had to bail, but they didn't come back. They were like, "Oh, that's too intense." And these are all badass rugby player type dudes, and I'm like, okay, you see all that smoke and mirrors you put out into the world.
Totally.
That's funny. That reminds me of a story. My mom and her older sister, she was having a baby, and my mom's older sister looks at my mom, goes, "Gosh, couldn't we just have a zipper where we could just unzip and take the baby and put it on the nightstand and then fit it back in?" My mom tells me the story, and she goes, "Yeah." She told her sister, she goes, "If that was possible, we would never put it back in." It'd be like, let's just leave the baby out for a little while.
Just leave the zipper open too. Like if you need to have any more, just like pass it through.
Yeah.
Paul, one thing I wanted to mention real quickly, the story of menstruation, I think, is the one area that I think most women find themselves at odds with the medical system, right? Because we have, as OBGYNs, we have an ultrasound that we do a lot of our diagnostics with. We have birth control pills, and we have surgery. Those are really what we use. Those are our three main, the sort of ingredients that make you a good OBGYN. And birth control pills we use for virtually everything. You have cyclical menstrual pain, you have heavy periods, you name it. Let's just put you on a birth control. And what that does is it shuts down that entire hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. And effectively just it shuts it down. It puts your ovaries sort of into a state of hibernation. And hey, problem solved, right? But what now I think is emerging is there's a lot of women that are embracing menstruation. I think that we actually do need to change our culture around that. We need to change the messaging around that. Like, don't be embarrassed about your periods anymore. Go on the birth control pill. Like, we need to acknowledge that this is probably the most important vital sign for a woman's health. Mm-hmm. It tells me about your thyroid. It tells me about your digestion. It tells me about your nutrients or any deficiencies. It tells me about I could go on and on and on.
Toxicity, everything.
Toxicity,
hydration.
Right, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated, it's life protecting life.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So if I squelch the bleeding, I don't know what's going on, and I lose that metric. Yeah, so it's an unpopular opinion, but I avoid birth control pills at all costs. That makes me not it makes me a very body little OBGYN.
Well,
for sure.
I have two books in my library. One was written by I believe it was Ellen Grant. She was a researcher hired by the British government in the late 40s or early 50s when they wanted to research the birth control pill to determine if it was safe. And this book is like 400 pages of research, and her report to the National Institutes of Health in England was this is extremely dangerous. It causes cancer. It was 400 pages roughly of research showing this is very, very dangerous, and the British government ignored it.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. We use it. I mean, we do this. I mean, so back to like women being aware of their bodies. What we just say is, hey, when you don't want to have a baby, you take this pill. When you're ready to have a baby, you come off the pill. We're not teaching fertility awareness methods. We're not teaching any of the other stuff that could be used for that same purpose. And yes, there is a specific reason that maybe a certain person should use hormonal contraceptive, or whether it's a pill or something else. But gosh, if we're just putting a Band-Aid on some symptom of heavy bleeding or whatever, intermenstrual bleeding, whatever it is, we're just not doing our job. So
Yeah.
that's another big part of my practice.
There's a lot of psychological changes as well.
Oh, yeah.
When a woman uses the birth control pill.
Absolutely.
The thing is, people don't realize that the hormonal system, when you start regulating hormones with hormones, you get entrainment. So research in physiology shows you can entrain the hormonal system within as little as 24 hours to 6 days. So
Wow.
an example of that would be if you drink a coffee at 8 o'clock this morning and it's your first time to have coffee, it's going to cause a huge spike in cortisol. Within 24 hours, your body will be craving the coffee because it's expecting that cortisol spike.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
So within 24 hours to 6 days, the hormonal system will adapt itself to the external stimulus. And without it, it takes quite a long time for it to rebalance itself.
Wow.
Just like, well, I won't go into a technical explanation because it'll sidetrack us a bit. So the point is the longer a woman's on a birth control pill, the harder it is for her body to re-entrain itself. It's just like she's forgotten how to be a woman is what happens at the physiological level, and it creates lots of problems.
And you're saying how it changes our scent too. So you can be attracted to the wrong male.
Yes.
Because the hormones change our way of perceiving what a man is. And so
Interesting.
you get more attracted to him. You're like, oh, this is my man. And then you say, oh, let's get off the birth control and have babies. And then you get off birth control and you're like, the smell is not right. And
interesting.
Yeah. And it's like,
Suddenly that's not your type.
That's not your type anymore.
Yes.
And you're like, whoa,
You're
I'm
married
married
to the wrong guy.
Yeah. So that can actually.
I mean, why isn't that a sort of like, of course that can happen, but instead the medical system says, well, we don't have evidence to support that.
Right.
Similarly to like, we lack evidence to say that if you don't wear a parachute when you jump out of an airplane from 50,000 feet, that you're going to die. Like, I'm still going to wear my parachute. So thank you. That just makes more sense.
Yes.
Yeah.